The Nationals leader, David Littleproud. David, great to see you. This was just outrageous yesterday. Should there be consequences?
Oh, well, there should be an apology. This was disgraceful. When you come to someone's country, you respect their customs and their cultures. We were disrespected, and I think it's important before the Premier leaves that he extends that apology for the behaviour of his officials towards one of our journalists, regardless of what the history is. When you're in our country, you live and abide by our values and our customs, and I think it would be a sign of respect if he was to extend that today before he leaves. And I think we should also shout out to our officials from Prime Minister and Cabinet that showed great courage. This was a very fluid and potentially one that could have escalated, a situation that could have escalated. And I think our officials handled themselves with utmost professionalism, but maintain the values and principles of our country. And I think that shouldn't be overlooked in the way that they try to protect our freedoms, our freedom of speech. And I think good on them, and they should be singled out for great congratulations.
It was intimidatory at the very least, and I suspect Chung Lei spoke to us before this joint media conference yesterday, and she was explaining how much of an emotional day it was for her. Can you imagine being in that position and then these tactics being used on her? And I do suspect that they were staff that work in the embassy here in Australia, so they should know our conventions and customs, right? There's really no excuse for that.
Well, Chung Lei handled herself with such grace and professionalism in light of what those officials were doing. Now, whether they work in the embassy in Canberra or they're from Beijing, it does not matter. They are guests of our country. And this would not be reciprocated in China. If it was, our Prime Minister would be calling on our staff for retribution in terms of their standing within the diplomatic corps, but we'd be apologising. The Prime Minister would apologise for their behaviour because it's not acceptable if we undertook this in their country, and we don't see this as acceptable in our country. And I think this is a moment where the Premier could actually reset our relationship, and respect is restored. And I think that's the word that needs to be understood here, is respect. And I think the Premier could do that today by simply making that call very clear.
Yeah, I think so too. Let's get back to our favourite topic, energy, right?
Yeah.
We've had this debate about 2030 and whether that is breaking the Paris Accord or not. Many business leaders think essentially in practice it would be breaking that accord. But what I want to talk to you about is what you flagged in the Australian newspaper today, that there wouldn't be any large-scale renewable projects if you were to win government. What do you mean by that?
We're trying to alleviate the need for the burden of regional Australia. Now, there's a whole lot that have been done in regional Australia at the moment, and that's because they've been low-hanging fruit. They've been near existing transmission lines. And so this all-renewables approach means that we will continue to need significant amounts of large-scale renewable projects that tear up your food security and push up your food prices. So why wouldn't we look at alternatives? And that's why we want to transition nuclear. And if we go to nuclear energy, then we don't need an all-renewables approach. And if we have gas with CCS...
To be fair, this government's approach isn't all renewables.
Well, at 82% by 2030 and then beyond. And so that's going to cost you, even by 2030, is $1.5 trillion. And that's Net Zero Australia's made that calculation, and $8 to $9 trillion by 2060. So why wouldn't we spread our energy eggs across different baskets and have nuclear as well as gas with CCS and some renewables? But let's look to prioritise renewables in an environment they can't destroy, and work with state governments with what they've got.
Are you saying 82% renewables by 2030 is too much? Would you have a new target then?
Well, we'll have an energy mix that will be very upfront and honest about our trajectory towards net zero by 2050, and that's not a linear pathway. What you experience at the moment from this government is a linear pathway, and what you're experiencing coming out of your wallet is that linear pathway. So when you've got sovereignty of all your resources, why wouldn't you spread your risk and make sure that you don't put all your energy eggs in one basket, but spread it across a mixture, but also gives you baseload power, because you won't keep manufacturing in this country. You can't keep subsidising.
But you've got a 10-year gap as well. So what do you do in that 10 years to produce?
That up with gas. You've got to firm gas is going to play a very significant role in firming up everything, as well as ensuring that nuclear can come online. Gas will play a significant role, and that'll be with carbon capture storage. That's zero emissions, and we'll do that in the right place. In fact, Japan is looking to use us as a carbon capture storage sink. They're having nuclear. They're reopening their nuclear power plants, as well as building a new 1,200 megawatt. They'll have renewables as part of that mix, but they'll have gas with CCS. So no economy of similar size of Australia has gone an all renewables approach, and this is what the government is.
But the government's not talking about all renewables. They just don't like talking about the 10 to 20% that has to be fossil fuels.
Well, I think you'll find that they're going to get very close to an all renewables approach with batteries.
Yeah.
And that's the approach that they've been very clear. If they're not, well, be very clear about what their mix will be. You'll see what we stand for. Peter Dutton and I are going to look Australians in the eye, and we're going to tell them there is a future to be made in Australia, and that's with reliable baseload power that's affordable and has zero emissions.
What's the mix?
Well, that we'll announce very soon, but we'll get that mix right to make sure we spread out.
Very soon?
Well, it's soon. I mean, we want to be upfront and honest. I mean, this is the thing. There is no climate war. There's how we get there. And the 2030 argument is
Seems like there's a war, to be honest.
Well,
it's been raging for 20 years.
That's convenient for the Teals and Labor.
Yeah, and,
we're committed to
business leaders. I mean, you've seen Twiggy Forrest today say, well it creates all this uncertainty.
No, uncertainty for his wallet. Let's be honest. Twiggy's got a vested interest in this, in Australian taxpayers.
He's putting a fair bit of his own money into
Well,
green
do it all.
too.
If he's so committed by it, do it all. And you'll see that from Mike Cannon books, and you'll see that from Simon Hunter.
No form of energy is unsubsidised by the government, though, to be fair.
But there's no dividend coming back to the Australian taxpayer at the moment. So what we want to do is get back to some basics.
Well, it's not coming in cheaper energy, for sure.
Well, no, there's not. And that's why, but also you can't sustain manufacturing in this country unless you address the fundamentals, which is reliable baseload power.
Well, you've stopped talking about the cheapness of electricity.
Well, we'll come back. Don't make no mistake.
Because nuclear is expensive.
Well, there's an upfront cost, but let me say that
Who pays for that, though?
Well, let me just say this. What you've got to understand is that this is an investment, a legacy over 80 to 90 years. And a nuclear power plant lasts a lot longer than a wind turbine, less than 20 years. And so CSIRO didn't factor in the dividend that we paid back to the Australian taxpayer for the extra 40 to 50 years beyond what they calculated the other day. And they also didn't take into account the capacity that we'd be running these at. They made assumptions, and that's fair enough. They had to make those assumptions, but we haven't told them what our energy mix would be. So how can they sit there and say this is accurate calculations? I get they're making assumptions.
Will you produce those calculations?
We'll be very upfront. Okay. Peter Dutton and I.
How will you base those calculations? Based off what?
Off our energy mix, about
what lived experience.
Capacity. Well, the capacity of how we'll build these plants, what capacity our nuclear power plants will have to run with, because
on
what
the assumption that taxpayers pay for it, or
well, we'll be upfront about the costs, about how it's paid for, and about the locations, everything. We're not going to hide anything. What you see is what you get out of Peter Dutton and I. We're going to be upfront and honest with the Australian people and just look them in the eye and say this is what strong leadership looks like. This is what it means to have a reliable energy system that is affordable, reduces our emissions, and gives us future of manufacturing something in this country.
Probably don't care, but it's going to be hard for the Libs to win back some of those Teal seats with this.
Well, I mean, with all due respect, I think many people in those Teal seats are feeling the pain that many people outside those seats are feeling about what's coming out of their wallets. We're not against, but these Teal people...
I hate to argue with you, but the point is you're not promising anything cheaper either in the short term.
What we're saying is we've got a sustainable future that's living up to those international commitments that those people in Teal seats ideologically view and believe in. I just say to those viewers that are from Teal seats, just take a little visit out west and understand the burden you're asking us to bear. For you to put your head on a pillow at night and think that you've saved the world, you've actually destroyed much of the environment where I live, and you're asking us to have our livelihoods taken away, and you've actually had your food security taken away. There is a better way. We can achieve this.
We've got a lot of land here. Is it really tearing up the best agricultural land?
Yeah, I was in Wagga last week.
Can't that be...
2,000
Can't that
acres.
be mitigated though?
Well, not with way that we're going.
Not everything's prime agricultural land though. We've got a lot of desert out there.
Yeah, but then you've got to have the transmission lines to plug it in, and that goes across prime agricultural land. So this is the folly that Chris Bowen and co go down. And 2,000 acres of cultivation country in Wagga I saw last week is going under solar panels. That's your food security gone. Now I just say to people living in capital cities, we're with your ideology. We want to reduce our emissions, but just appreciate the burden that you're asking us to bear in regional Australia. And we just ask you to be fair. We're with you in the ideology. It's just how we get there, and we don't want Australians to have to hurt in that journey.
Okay. We should all get to the bush more.
Yeah, totally.
David, good to see you. Good to have you in the city. See you soon.